So I thought this time I'd talk about, well, the title of this video. Balkanization would be better. And I'm not specifically talking about, for example, the United States, this country of Australia, but in general, there are quite a few places on Earth right now where balkanization, breaking up into smaller entities, would indeed be the best option. When people talk about the strength of the European Union, that mythical thing that we are yet to see, they always talk about how, well, if you pool all of the resources, then you have more resources. If you, for example, just join two countries, which are of equal size, you double the resources. You more than double the problems, however. Resources will grow linearly. Problems will grow exponentially. Because if you have a completely homogeneous population, then you have the single entity that is that population. And it is able to identify what it is trying to do and move towards goals. If, however, you then combine two entities, you will have, there's the approach to this problem, and then there's the approach to the problem of how we interact with one another, and then there's how the other group is moving towards the goal, and then there's worrying about any ulterior motives of the other place. If then you have three, well, as an individual, you now have to worry about the goal, and you also have to worry about your relationship with Group B and your relationship with Group C, but you also have to worry about the relationship between Group B and Group C. You have to worry about the relationship between Group C and the goal and any ulterior goals, and you have to worry about the relationship with Group B and the goal. This is why, as we've seen, the rise of diversity, and I'm not limiting this to racial, religious, sexual, any rise in diversity always comes with an increase in overhead. There's many people who have asked, if diversity is such a strength, why do we have to spend billions of dollars a year in order to make it not destroy us? All that this does is leads to an increasingly top-heavy system, because you have to manage all of these aspects. The bureaucracy will endlessly expand. The most boring of these cases are the ones that you will hear the most about. Sexual, racial, etc. Because these exist on a scale that an individual person can understand. You can understand black people and white people and Asian people because you can see individuals. You can understand gays and straights. So when we deal with the problems of diversity, you will mostly think along those lines. And fair enough, you interact with a physical world around you. However, consider this. The diversity of the United States, as in the states themselves. When the US was founded, it was essentially the New England region. Geographically, all quite similar. Economically, all quite similar. Culturally, all quite similar. And one state might be producing one thing, and another state might be producing another. So there's a symbiotic relationship. The US is no longer just that. Now you have the East Coast and the West Coast, just to simplify it a little bit. California is able to have a say in the affairs of New York or Massachusetts, and vice versa. We talk about the American steel industry, but would it not be reasonable to say that there are actually multiple steel industries? Maybe there's a West Coast steel industry and an East Coast steel industry. Are those two the same entity? Or is it East and West are working together, but they're also in competition with one another? And they're walking around this strange paradigm where, yes, there are different laws for the states, but then there's also federal laws. and each of them have to deal with those same laws. But when those laws are written, they have to take into account both the East and the West Coast. There's no real attempt at optimization. This is probably the easiest way of summarizing the problem with diversity. As you make rules for an increasingly diverse group, you stop being able to come up with the best solution. You instead find yourself in a position where you're only trying to come up with the least bad solution that you can manage. Because maybe, if you're really good at it, you don't come up with a solution that is the worst solution for everyone. Case in point, what the EU is currently dealing with, the undercurrent to all of the migrant crisis feeding into the banking crisis, is a fundamental structural problem with the EU. The talk about the rich countries helping poor countries to develop seems noble. But here's what that actually means. You're a company in Germany. You worked hard. You rebuilt yourself after the Second World War. You make products which are cheaper, but also of higher quality than anywhere else. You are being taxed not to pay for the roads upon which you drive, but to subsidize industries in other countries, which will then compete directly with you. Now, if you work for the EU, this is great, because then that means you'll get to tax the people in Germany, and you also get to tax the people in Poland, or whatever other region we want to think of. So if you are part of that EU bureaucratic elite, this is good. If you're the people in Germany, you are literally paying to set up your competition. But then, of course, it will simply be referred to as the European steel industry, the European electronics industry. And the fact that the rise in one region is actually at the direct cost of someone else who had to pay for that rise to begin with via subsidies. This is never addressed. Separate entities, which either rise or fall on their own merits, are the best way of going about things. It is why these towers of Babel that we have witnessed throughout history, either with the Bronze Age collapse, or the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Mughal Empire, the present state of China, all of these suffer from diversity because it robs the dynamic ability to adapt. There have been many places I've worked or been involved in where I've worked with people exactly like me. Similar height, similar facial structure, same skin tone, same first language, same cultural heritage, etc. Those are always the easiest places to work, for the simple reason that I understand how to interact with these people. What that actually means is, what constitutes sarcasm is sorted. All of the social rules of when am I being aggressive, when am I being assertive, when am I sending a subtle signal, when am I genuinely going along with you, what is approval worthy. All of that is sorted. So we don't need to worry about the interactions within the group as something that must be dynamically filtered on the fly, so you can focus on the task at hand. If, however, you have racially diverse groups, because there is a difference between, in my case, everyone is a tall, straight, white, Christian male, etc., but we have diverse skill sets. So we have an engineer, but we also have a computer engineer, and we also have an economist, and we also have a marketer, etc., etc. People bringing different skills. And 6 physicists all in the same room, so you have exactly the same technical knowledge, but you're from all of these diverse cultural backgrounds, which means most of the time you will not actually spend, even though you may spend talking about it, your actual brain cycles will be spent just on establishing what is acceptable behavior. because that has to be determined dynamically from interactions you have with one another. You could say, oh, well, if we had one culture. The only way that's going to happen is if one culture is imposed upon the rest of the group. This is happening in China right now, where the Han Mandarin are, well, they're not even trying to impose their own culture, they're simply trying to remove all other cultures. Tibet no longer exists in the official canon of China. There is no Tibetan culture. With their efforts in Hong Kong, there will soon be no Cantonese culture. If we want each of these cultures, each of these ethnicities, because race is far too low resolution, to actually exist, the correct way of dealing with them is not to have them in a single integrated entity. One of the big problems I find with how my country has treated the Aboriginals is that we want them in a halfway house. We want them to be Aboriginals, we want them to have their own culture, etc., but we also want them to be Australians. Aboriginal culture is utterly incompatible with modern Australian society. It was utterly incompatible with the British when they came. We are talking about, I wouldn't even say incompatible hardware. We're talking about integrating hardware with a literal book. Books are fine, but you can't just plug them into a USB port and expect them to work. Even what you see before you now, I'm created from cells. I'm not one single outside and then just a mess inside. I have skin cells. I have different types of skin cells. I have different types of tissues. I have different organs. Things serve different functions, they require different environments, but they all work together. But they're also sealed off from one another with appropriately permeable and selectively permeable membranes. I'm a nationalist, not meaning, as many would like to say, that I believe my nation should conquer all others. Indeed, that is precisely the opposite of what I think. For one, I think that Australia should most definitely be divided into, at the bare minimum, 2 countries. Just the tyranny of distance has not been conquered simply because we can move quickly. People in Western Australia are developing their own economy, are developing their own culture. One can tell if someone is from Perth. One can tell if someone is from Melbourne or Sydney. And now that we have some 25 million people, that's too many people spread out over too large of a distance with too many competing industries. You've got mining in Queensland, you've got mining in Western Australia, you've got mining in other places. This could all be viewed, as previously stated, as the Australian mining industry, but really they are competing mining industries. Let them self-govern, but let them also have the ability to trade with one another. Some might say that this is what the EU is. No, the EU is constantly working to dissolve those national borders and to not have, as a nation state, the ability to bargain on your own behalf. When a smaller country joins the EU, what they are told is, now your voice will be lent the full power of all of the other countries. This is not true. Now your country, your voice has merely been added to what Germany wants to convey.